Hi, I'm Skinny Cheeks. This will be my second PTS patch note video for update 37, and here I'll cover the combat balance adjustments. I just put out a video going over the changes to light attacks, so make sure to check that one out if you're still trying to wrap your head around what's going on there. Now, I didn't really express it too much in that video, but for those that watched the patch note review live, you'll know I'm extremely pleased with the direction of these patch notes overall. So much of this seems like it was derived from player feedback and pain points that have been ongoing, and it was just really refreshing to see them take a patch and just focus in on that. So props where props are due. Thank you, Zoss. But there is a good bit to cover here, so let's just go ahead and get started. First up, the class skills. We'll start here with Dragonknights. Chains of Devastation. This morph now grants Major Berserk for 10 seconds after casting, rather than Empower, as Molten Armaments already grants it in a much more effective way. As such, this morph was renamed to better denote its effects. Such devastation was our intention. So I think it definitely makes sense to get rid of the Empower here. As they said, Molten Armaments is just a way better way to get that if you're a DK, and we'll see a good bit more of this going forward, so I'm really glad that they are going back and adjusting some of these skills that had Empower as a perk to them, now that Empower is a bit more one-dimensional for the type of gameplay boost that it offers. As far as Major Berserk being the substituted buff, well, still trying to wrap my head around the implications there. It seems really strong, so let's take a look at the skill. This morph is the opposite of the commonly used tank morph Unrelenting Grip, the morph that pulls the targets to you, but the Chains of Devastation morph actually pulls you to the target as a gap closer. I've seen some people incorrectly state that you can't use it in group play because they have changed chains to now taunt enemies. We'll get into that more in a future video where I cover all of the tanking changes, but this is not true with this ability. This ability does not taunt since it pulls you to the enemy instead of pulling the enemy to you, so you don't have to worry about accidentally grabbing aggro or anything like that. The damage from the skill itself is not awful, but it's not anything too great either. It's about 60% of what you'd get from a non-stacked cast of Whip. But the nice thing about this skill is that it is in the Ardent Flame skill line, so it will add to your Whip stacks. If you are unfamiliar with that term, Molten Whip has an extra component to it called Seething Fury, where each cast of an Ardent Flame ability will add a stack to it passively up to 3 stacks max, and each of these stacks make your Whip hit 20% harder, so 60% at the 3 stacks. Each stack also adds 100 weapon and spell damage, and while the stacks that buff your Whip damage are all consumed when you use your Whip, the weapon and spell damage is not. It still gets that 15-second timer, which will refresh each time you hit another Ardent Flame ability that is not Whip. So I say all this to give a little background info to show the total power using the Chains of Devastation skill, since it isn't just an empty cast every 10 seconds for a 10% damage done buff. So to sum up everything we get, it's an upfront hit that deals a small amount of damage, it pulls you to your target, it adds a 20% increase to the next Whip hit, it refreshes your weapon and spell damage buff from Seething Fury, which will really help to keep that up 100% of the time at 300 weapon and spell damage. It now gives Major Berserk for 10% damage done for 10 seconds, and oh yeah, it also adds in Major Expedition for 4 seconds. Holy chains, Batman. When you look at it this way, there is so much crammed into one skill. YouTuber Rye has already done a DPS test on the PTS with MagDK, and he's using a pretty standard setup that we've been used to seeing over the last couple of patches, except in that slot, instead of the Engulfing Flames or Burning Talons that we normally see, he has Chains of Devastation. And he got really good results here, ended up with over 130k DPS, and with DKs now being fixed, remember those parses from the last patch with DK, they had some bugged abilities, and they were hitting a little harder than they were supposed to. So 130k is definitely up a little bit from what they were previously doing. So shout out to Rye. I'll have his parse linked in the description if you want to watch the whole thing. He's been doing quite a bit of testing lately, so make sure to throw him a sub as well if you want to keep up with all of that. But yeah, this looks like it should work well for both Mag and StamDK. StamDK does have a bit of trouble sustaining Burning Talons if also using Whip as a spammable, since Talons is a 4-second dot, but Chains only needing to be cast every 10 seconds could definitely be doable in the right setups there. And then of course, this should be very easy easy to sustain for mag decays. But it isn't just bosses that this seems to be useful for. It could also work its way into some trash setups as well. Throw down your eruption and wall, and then you could chain yourself into the trash pack and start with your melee AoE abilities while having a nice 10% damage done buff for everything. Seems pretty versatile and looking like a strong ability to use for a variety of different situations in both PvE and PvP. So we'll see where the skill ends up. Is it too strong? I'm not sure, maybe, but several other skills also got buffs, so I'm still trying to wrap my head around the bigger picture with it all. But let's go ahead and move on to Necromancers. So the Grave Robber synergy got the damage reduced by approximately 47% to ensure it is of similar power to other synergies of its ilk, such as Conduit or Combustion. So this is the synergy that comes with Necro using Unnerving or Avid Boneyard. This was an absolute monster of a synergy, and unfortunately due to PvP, this is getting a really hefty nerf. It definitely was overperforming, and at the end of the day, it doesn't really make sense that it hits so much harder than these other synergies that we get from other regular skills. It was up closer to that Gravity Crush synergy level that is on an ultimate. So yeah, it's probably in a bit healthier spot now where they've moved it to. But the skill itself is still really strong. People are still going to run this. It's not getting dropped off your bars or anything like that. Having the synergy on it will just be icing on the cake. Next change is to Death Gleaning. The passive now restores 666 magicka and stamina when a nearby enemy dies, up from 200. So a nice little buff here for sure. Over 3 times the amount of sustain from this passive. Should be super noticeable in trash fights and also boss fights with multiple side adds. Not really a lot to break down here, just a straight up buff for Necro sustain for tanks, healers, and DPS. Let's move on to Sorcerers. Conjured Ward. Increase the damage shield size of this ability and the regenerative ward morph by 10%. Increase the max health cap of these abilities to 55%, up from 50%. This ability and its morphs now dynamically scale between the higher of your max health or magicka rather than only magicka. And then the Hardened Ward morph increased the damage shield size of this morph by approximately 7% and increased the max health cap to 72%, up from 60%. And then on the other morph, Regenerative Ward, they renamed it to prevent confusion with the buff type. So this morph here gives minor endurance and intellect to the group, increasing magicka and stamina recovery. So the new name definitely makes more sense there. Overall, this is pretty awesome. Not only is this a buff for mag sorks who would normally use this ability, but now sork tanks have access to a really strong shield. You can see here with close to 50k health, we're getting over a 22k shield here from Conjured Ward. And then if we add in the champion point node Bastion, we can get that up to 25k. This is such a massive shield. And the health bars for Sorcerers are just going to naturally be a little bit higher too because of their Expert Summoner passive. And this is not even with a Warden in the group giving minor toughness. So gonna be really, really nice for sork tanks. And then even Stam sorks can use this now too. They won't get as much benefit out of it, but with their health being higher than their magicka pool, this is going to be a straight buff there for them as well. So with Conjured Ward on my Orc Stamina Sorcerer here, I was getting about 12k for a shield, which is definitely respectable. If you compare that to what I would normally get slotting something like Bone Shield, that was only like 8 to 9k. And then if I wanted to use Bastion, I could get that a little bit higher, up close to that 14k range. All around, just a really nice buff for Sorcerers for both PvE and PvP. I'm really interested to see what people do with this one. And then next up is Mage's Fury. They increased the size of the AoE portion of this ability and its morphs to 5 meters, up from 4. Mage's Wrath. This morph now deals its execute damage to all targets nearby rather than dealing an initial hit and a smaller amount of damage to nearby targets. This will result in an approximate 129% damage increase of the AoE. So this is pretty huge and something I've been hoping for this skill for a while now. The two morphs didn't feel different enough to me before, and now this really separates them, as one is more single target oriented and gives a ton of sustain back, and the other is AoE focused. This should be a really nice option on certain fights. The way I'm reading it is that the execute damage will splash to the side targets even if those targets are not in execute range. So as long as you are hitting something that is that extra high damage, will be splashing to everything around. Definitely see this working its way into AoE boss fights and into trash pools. Let's move on to Templars now. Everlasting Sweep. Increase the duration of the pulsing damage over time to 10 seconds at base, up from 6 seconds. This morph no longer grants Empower, as Solar Flare and its morphs already grant this buff. As such, the name has been adjusted to prevent confusion. Another great adjustment here to account for the redundant and often unneeded Empower buff. I really like what they've done here with the name as well. It's really clever. Everlasting Sweep, considering that with this skill only costing just over 70 ultimate, if you hit enough enemies with it, you could have pretty much permanent or close to permanent uptime on it, since it does increase by 2 seconds for each enemy hit. At just one enemy hit, you get 12 seconds out of it, but if you can hit 6 enemies, it will last for 22 seconds. It does appear to have a cap here at 6 enemies to increase that duration, but still 22 seconds is pretty long already. So not a lot of changes here for Templars, but this is still a very welcome change to their sweep ultimate. Moving on to Wardens, their Cutting Dive ability. This morph no longer requires the enemy to not be off balance for the damage over time to apply, and will now apply anytime it deals damage. So I've seen a bit of discussion around this, and I think some people might be a few patches behind. The way this skill currently works, there is no more stacking up bleed effect. That's been gone now for a little while. Instead, it adds a 10-second dot if you hit an enemy that's not off balance. So the skill was pretty good. It was just a bit awkward because sometimes the dot would just not apply because off balance is going. So this was circumventable on PC with add-ons to have the timers counting down if you want to really track all that stuff in real time. But outside of that, it's kind of hard to track when off balance is going, and it's pretty unintuitive for a skill. Now it will just always apply the bleed, which is a great quality of life change in my opinion. You can use this skill as a spammable if you want, or if you want to use a different spammable, you can use this as a standard 10-second dot, and it works really well for that too. Next up is Crystallized Shield. This ability and the Shimmering Shield morph now grant 2 ultimate when the shield takes damage, rather than restoring magicka equal to 22% of the ability's cost. Increase the cost of this ability and its morphs to 4320, up from 3780. Reduce the shield strength of this ability and the Shimmering Shield morph by approximately 33%. The Crystallized Slab morph no longer grants magicka or the new ultimate restore when the shield takes damage in exchange for the damage done and stun. This morph does retain the original size of the damage shield. Reduce the damage per hit of this morph by approximately 33%. So they did do a dev comment here. I'll go ahead and read through this. Currently, this ability and its morphs are enabling too much defensive power for the Warden against ranged opponents, while simultaneously allowing them to keep the ability up with next to no cost. In order to peel back some of the power in those regards, we are increasing the cost and removing the self-sustaining portion, while also trying to give some love back with ultimate generation. While doing this, we're also trying to differentiate the morph power you pick from where Slab is more about shaking off ranged builds and being more defensive, while Shimmering doubles down on the juicy ultimate generation. So I think the dev comment sums it up pretty well. This will be a bit more expensive to keep up, so you might have to tweak some things in your build to account for it if you were casting it quite a bit, but the ultimate from the Shimmering morph will be a bit higher now, and I think this is probably a fair change overall for what is a really strong skill. However, I'm not super experienced on Warden, so let me know in the comments what you guys think about this one. But that's it for the class changes. Nothing here for Nightblades in this patch, but I guess that's better than nerfs, right? Overall, I think most of the changes were positive, but let's go ahead and get into the other skill lines. So we have Elemental Susceptibility. This morph's secondary effects are now tracked separately rather than being linked to Major Breach. This will allow the status effects from the ability to continue while multiple applications are active, or when other sources of Major Breach apply and override this. And then they reduced it to every 7.5 seconds, down from 6. I really am glad they figured this one out. It was a really cool change to the skill, and unfortunately it was just unusable in a lot of scenarios. So this will open it back up again. It did get nerfed a little with the tick rate being only 7.5 seconds now, so each cast it will tick 5 times total instead of 6, but I still think it'll be a really nice option to have going for a lot of setups. For Wall of Frost, this will now apply Minor Breach and reduce the movement speed of enemies by 40% for 4 seconds when damaging a chilled target, rather than immobilizing them for 4 seconds. The developer comment here said, in efforts to reduce the amount of passive crowd control in the game, we're shifting the power of Wall of Frost control to a snare rather than an immobilize, while helping it gain some more use cases in PvE parts of the game. So this is pretty nice for Wall Wall of Frost, the thing I think some people have been overlooking is that you do need the target to be chilled for the Minor Breach debuff to apply. It doesn't just apply automatically with the wall. So as a tank, if this is the only ice thing you're running and no one else in the group is focused into Frost, you probably aren't going to see hardly any uptime here. So it does need to be used in combination with something that will be proccing chilled. So for AoE, this might be Warden using Winter's Revenge and Arctic Blast, or someone using the Frost Pulsar spammable to proc chilled on the targets. For single target, it's pretty easy since your Ice Staff taunt procs chilled automatically, but generally for single target, you'd already have Minor Breach covered with your Sword and Shield taunt, Pierce Armor. However, in some cases, if you are doing staff tanking and not using a Sword and Shield, this could be a really nice source of Minor Breach without needing to get that from the Sundered status effect from physical damage. Next up, we have Stampede. This here is just a fix. I guess it was only critting on the initial target that it hit and not everything. It's supposed to be a guaranteed crit on that upfront hit. So now everything that gets hit with the upfront hit will be a crit. So just a small buff for it in AoE scenarios. For Wrecking Blow, this morph now also grants Major Berserk for 5 seconds. Now it's really time to wreck it. So this was another victim of the Empower change. Pretty weird to have a heavy attack buff tied to a 0.8 second cast time ability. So I'm glad they've gone back and adjusted it. Similar to Chains of Devastation for DKs, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the bigger picture here. My initial thoughts are that it will be a very good option for single target DPS, but not necessarily overperform compared to other setups that you could go with. It does have that drawback of being a cast time, and it also doesn't have any other secondary effect really aside from that Major Berserk. So comparing it to other spammables, some have quite a few other perks on top of their damage dealt and could also be used with dual wield, which has better offensive stats on it than the two-handed offensive stats. Like I said, still in the process of forming a conclusion about this one, but my initial take is that it definitely looks like a strong contender if you don't mind the cast time and single target damage is your main focus. So Charles has already posted a Stamina Templar parse for this update where he got over 130k using Wrecking Blow as the spammable. I'll have this linked in the description as well for those that want to check out the full video. He does a ton of ESO content, so make sure to throw a sub his way as well if you want to keep up to date on all that. Now this does look like it will be a tiny bit higher for single target damage than using jabs as your spammable, but remember jabs also deals AoE damage and it provides Major Brutality and sorcery, so I definitely think there is still reasons to use both options. Next up is Mist Form. This ability and its morphs are no longer a toggled ability that reduce your damage taken from players or grant crowd control immunity while active. Instead, they now teleport you to the position of your cursor up to a maximum of 15 meters away and reduce your damage taken from the next 3 projectiles by 100% while teleporting. Casting any of these abilities will increase the cost of the ability by 33% for 4 seconds. The base cost is now 40.50 per cast, which reduces to 37.80 at rank 4 of the base ability. Elusive Mist. This morph now grants Major Expedition and Major Evasion for 4 seconds after reappearing rather than just Major Expedition. And then the Blood Mist morph now causes you to deal damage around you and heal for the damage caused once every 2 seconds over 20 seconds after activating the ability rather than once every second while active. Then they increase the damage per tick by approximately 9%. So we have some pretty big adjustments to Mist Form here. In theory, they are pretty similar to the Sorcerer's Streak now, but with a bit different flavor to both the bonuses and the aesthetics. And the morphs are fairly differentiated from one another as well, with one giving Major Expedition and Evasion. So Elusive Mist is kind of the get out of dodge morph. And then Blood Mist has me really interested. I actually didn't understand the way this worked at first, but essentially it's just a persisting 20-second AoE around you whenever you cast it, and anything hit by that AoE will also heal you for the damage done. This sounds really good for both PvE and PvP and just really fits with that vampire theme. So you could have your health draining with Simmering Frenzy to gain extra weapon and spell damage, and then also passively be healing off the enemies around you with Blood Mist. The tooltip on this ability isn't anything too crazy. It's the same as Arctic Blast on Wardens or Solar Barrage on Templars, though Arctic Blast chilled damage actually makes that really strong on Wardens. But the damage won't be blowing you away for Blood Mist. It's really that extra healing that makes this pretty cool. I'm definitely interested to see how this plays out for PvE vampires. I think you're definitely going to want to run this morph. It's going to be a nice little bit of extra AoE that you can run and also a bit of self-healing. I'll admit I have not done a lot of vampire recently, but I was really unhappy with the way that Mist Form simply had no PvE function at all since that damage reduction did not apply there. So from that aspect, I'm really really glad to see a rework here. For PvP, I'm not sure. I've seen some that are for and some that are against this change already. Let me know in the comments what you guys that do a lot more PvP think about this one. But for PvE, it is miles ahead of where it was before. All right, next up is the Piercing Howl ability. This is the main Werewolf spammable. So the patch notes were a little confusing on this one. I think some of the stuff was labeled kind of weird. So let's just take a look at the two morphs here on the PTS. The Howl of Agony morph appears unchanged. This one gives an additional bonus to its damage when facing the target. So not really for most group play scenarios there, but the other morph, Howl of Despair, got some extra new bonuses. They added in Minor Force on top of the Empower buff that the synergy provides, and they extended the timer on the buffs from 5 seconds to 10 seconds. Then they also added the ability to take your own synergy. I do wish the timer was maybe 20 seconds instead of 10 seconds, since you can only hit a synergy of the same type every 20 seconds. So only having a max of 50% uptime on these is a little bit underwhelming. Or if the synergy affected you and 5 nearby allies so that there was some overlap with multiple people taking the synergy to get the high uptimes. Still, I do think it's kind of interesting that werewolves can take their own synergies here now though, especially solo, as some set requirements do have that synergy condition, so this could open up the door for a few new possibilities there. But overall, lots of pretty good balance changes with this set of patch notes. I'm pretty excited to dig into all of it a little bit further, and I will be keeping my eye on the major Berserk stuff. That's a pretty big buff that they've added into the equation on a couple of abilities. So I'll be doing one more video covering the week 1 patch notes, and that will be going over some really nice quality of life stuff that we got for combat, such as the tanking updates, some jewelry traits that were reworked, and also some nice hybridization done for a couple of our glyphs. So be on the lookout for that video very soon. Thanks a bunch for stopping by. Let me know what you all think about this round of patch notes so far. And a big thanks to my current Patreon supporters and YouTube members. The contributions help a ton to keep the website and YouTube channel going. And a special thanks to Nicholas, Simon, Cougar's Bay and the Cougar City Guild, the Order of War Guild, Cantankerous Cat, Shady, Iffy, Blake1816, Mordecai1212, Santanico, Vidridi, Florian, Phoenix, Nalandia, Unemployed, Chryseliana, Cha-Cha, and Technical KO. Thanks again, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.